The wedding photos looked perfect. Smiles, champagne, and a couple everyone envied. But behind those photos, Leah was living a lie. She had married Daniel, the man her family adored, but her heart still belonged to her sister's fiancé, Mark. What began as a secret spark turned into something neither of them could control. Every message, every glance became a promise they couldn't keep. And when Emma's engagement party finally came, Leah knew the truth couldn't stay buried any longer. By morning, someone wouldn't be alive to see how it all ended. Leah returned from her honeymoon, carrying an ache she couldn't name. Daniel talked about starting their new life, and she nodded at all the right moments. But when her phone buzzed that night, she already knew who it was. Mark's name lit the screen like a bruise she couldn't cover. She stared at it for a long time before deleting the message. Daniel came in with wine and a smile, and Leah smiled back, pretending her heart wasn't still somewhere else, with a man she could never admit she loved. The days after the wedding felt like an act. She couldn't stop performing. Everyone congratulated her, calling her lucky. Leah laughed and thanked them, but guilt followed her everywhere. She would catch herself remembering Mark's hand on hers, his promises whispered months before. When Emma called to talk about her own upcoming engagement, Leah felt her stomach twist. She said all the right things, her voice steady, her words hollow. When the call ended, she sat in silence, wondering how long a lie could last before it consumed everything. Emma asked Leah to help plan her engagement party. Leah said yes, because saying no would raise questions she couldn't answer. Every task felt like punishment: choosing flowers, tasting cakes, writing invitations for a celebration she wished wasn't happening. At night, Leah scrolled through photos of her wedding, forcing herself to believe she'd made the right choice. But every time she looked at Daniel's smile, she felt only emptiness. Love wasn't supposed to feel this heavy. She told herself the affair was over, yet her mind kept circling back to Mark. Leah visited her mother, who was thrilled to have both daughters settling down. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and old family memories. Her mother talked about Emma's fiancé with excitement. Unaware, her words felt like small cuts. Leah nodded and helped with the dough, pretending everything was normal. When she left, she sat in her car for a long time before driving home. She wanted to confess, to tell someone everything, but the thought of destroying her family stopped her. The secret felt safer locked inside, even as it kept eating her alive. Leah began waking early, checking her phone before Daniel stirred. Sometimes there were messages from Mark, short, loaded words that meant nothing to anyone else but everything to her. She would delete them immediately, terrified Daniel might see. During breakfast, Daniel would talk about work while Leah smiled faintly, pretending to listen. Her mind was elsewhere, trapped between guilt and longing. Every buzz of her phone made her heart jump. It was a strange kind of addiction, not the thrill of love but the fear of being caught loving the wrong person. When Leah saw Mark for the first time after the wedding, it was at a coffee shop by accident, or maybe not. They didn't speak, but their eyes did all the talking. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, a reminder that Emma's world wasn't as perfect as it seemed either. Leah left first, her pulse steady but her thoughts spinning. That night she dreamed about him. And when she woke, the dream felt more real than her marriage. The distance between them wasn't made of miles, it was made of guilt and desire. Daniel tried to bring Leah closer, planning weekend getaways and movie nights. Leah went along with them, forcing herself to act like the wife everyone expected her to be. But each time Daniel held her hand, she imagined Mark's instead. She hated herself for it. The guilt didn't make her stop. It only deepened the craving. The affair wasn't just about love. It was about control, about wanting something she wasn't supposed to have. Leah kept thinking if she could see Mark once more, maybe it would finally lose its power over her. One afternoon, Leah drove past the small hotel where everything had started. The neon sign flickered like a memory, refusing to fade. Without planning to, she turned into the lot and parked. She sat there for minutes, watching the entrance, hoping he wouldn't come out, and terrified he would. The past felt closer than the present. She thought about calling Emma, about telling her something harmless just to feel less guilty. But when she picked up her phone, the only contact she scrolled to was Mark's. She didn't call him, but she didn't leave either. Emma called Leah later that evening to talk about the party details again. Leah pretended to listen, staring at the wall while her sister's voice filled the room. Emma said she trusted Leah with everything, that she couldn't do this without her. The words hurt more than any argument could. Leah said she'd make it perfect, and she meant it, though she didn't know if perfection was possible anymore. When the call ended, Leah sat in the dark, feeling like she was disappearing into the very lie she built. Daniel came home with groceries and a bottle of wine, excited about cooking together. Leah joined him, smiling when he kissed her cheek. For a brief moment it almost felt normal, like she could rebuild herself from the pieces of this marriage. But later, when Daniel was asleep, Leah checked her phone again. A new message waited. "I can't stop thinking about you." No name, just words she recognized too well. She locked her phone and stared at the ceiling, knowing she should block him but unable to press that button. Leah's days blurred together. Work became a distraction she couldn't focus on. Even small things, like her boss calling her by the wrong name, made her drift into thoughts of Mark. She started missing meetings and replying to emails late at night, the glow of her computer screen reflecting the chaos in her mind. Daniel noticed her exhaustion and told her to take a break. She smiled weakly, promising she would. But instead of rest, Leah scrolled through Mark's old texts, rereading every message until the words started losing their meaning. On a quiet Saturday, Emma invited Leah to lunch. Leah agreed, hoping to feel normal. The restaurant was bright and filled with laughter, but Leah felt miles away. Emma showed her engagement ring, beaming, while Leah forced a smile. Mark arrived late, kissing Emma's cheek as if nothing was wrong. Leah's stomach tightened. When their eyes met briefly, she looked away. Throughout lunch, she barely spoke. Emma joked that Leah was acting like an overprotective sister. Leah laughed, but inside she was screaming. It was the longest meal of her life. That night, Leah couldn't sleep. She replayed the lunch in her mind. Every smile, every glance. She felt like she was losing control of something she never truly owned. She wanted to stop, to confess, to erase it all, but part of her didn't want to. The secret had become her oxygen. Without it, she didn't know who she'd be. Lying beside Daniel, she whispered to herself that she'd end it. But in the morning, her phone buzzed again, and her promise dissolved before she could even open her eyes. Leah's friend Sarah invited her to coffee, saying she seemed distant. Leah agreed, trying to sound casual. Sarah talked about work and upcoming travel, while Leah nodded absently. When Sarah mentioned Emma's engagement, Leah's hands tightened around the cup. Sarah noticed and asked if everything was okay. Leah lied, saying she was just stressed. Sarah gave her a knowing look but didn't push. Leah drove home after that, staring straight ahead. She felt exposed, like her secret was written all over her face for the world to read. The night before Emma's engagement invitations were mailed, Leah stood by the kitchen counter, staring at the stack of envelopes. Each one felt like a nail in her own coffin. Daniel walked in, kissed her cheek, and said he was proud of how close she and Emma were. Leah nodded, barely holding herself together. When he went to bed, she picked up one of the invitations and tore it in half before catching herself. She taped it back together with shaking hands, realizing she wasn't just keeping secrets anymore. She was starting to break under them. Leah spent the next few days pretending to be excited about Emma's engagement plans. She visited boutiques, compared flower arrangements, and smiled through every fitting. But each time Emma mentioned Mark's name, Leah's chest tightened. She thought she could handle the guilt, but the sight of Emma glowing with joy made it harder. One night, while checking the final guest list, Leah noticed Mark's handwriting beside her own. It felt like a secret message, even though it wasn't. She closed the folder quickly, realizing her sister's happiness had become her punishment. The engagement party became Leah's obsession. She wanted every detail to be flawless, maybe to distract herself, maybe to prove she wasn't the villain she felt like. She worked late into the night, arranging seating charts and playlists. Daniel offered to help, but she insisted on doing it alone. The truth was, she didn't want him too close to the chaos in her head. When she looked at the color palette of white and gold, it made her nauseous. Every perfect shade reminded her that she was building a celebration she wished would never happen. While running errands for the party, Leah stopped at a bakery to pick up samples. The woman behind the counter asked if it was for her sister's big day, and Leah nodded. The question that followed caught her off guard. "And when's yours?" Leah froze before smiling politely, saying it already happened. The woman congratulated her warmly, and Leah thanked her before walking out with tears in her eyes. It was a harmless conversation, but it exposed something deep. How easy it was to pretend everything was fine when everything was falling apart. At home, Daniel was setting up candles for a surprise dinner. He looked genuinely happy, proud of their new beginning. Leah tried to match his warmth, but her mind was elsewhere. During dinner, he talked about maybe taking a short trip together, somewhere quiet. She agreed automatically, her fork moving across the plate without tasting anything. Later that night, Daniel fell asleep watching a movie, and Leah sat beside him, scrolling through her phone. Her thumb hovered over Mark's name. She didn't message him, but the silence between them felt louder than words. Leah began dreaming about Mark again. In her dreams, he wasn't real. More like a memory replaying on a loop. Sometimes she woke up calling his name before catching herself. Daniel asked if she was okay, and she said she was fine. But inside she knew something was cracking. The distance between what she felt and what she showed was getting wider. She started avoiding family gatherings, making excuses not to see Emma. But when Emma mentioned needing her help with final preparations, Leah couldn't say no. She never could. At Emma's house, Leah helped her fold invitation cards. Emma was humming, full of joy, unaware of the chaos sitting across from her. Leah watched her hands move, graceful and steady, and wondered how different life would be if she'd never crossed that line with Mark. She wanted to confess, to end the weight pressing on her chest. But as Emma looked up and smiled, thanking her for helping, Leah lost her nerve. The guilt turned to anger, not at Emma, but at herself, for wanting something she was never supposed to have. On her way home that night, Leah stopped by a quiet park and sat on a bench. The wind carried faint sounds from the nearby church, the same bell that had rung on her wedding day. Each ring reminded her of what she'd broken to get here. She imagined telling Daniel the truth, watching his face change from love to disbelief. But she couldn't bear it. Instead, she sat there until the streetlights flickered on, staring at the trees and trying to convince herself that love couldn't be that wrong if it felt this strong. The next morning, Leah woke up determined to let go. She deleted Mark's contact, blocked his number, and hid their old photos in a locked folder. She told herself this was the first step toward fixing her life. But that afternoon, when Emma sent a photo of her engagement ring for approval, Leah stared at it too long. She zoomed in on Mark's hand, the faint scar on his wrist she knew too well. The feeling returned instantly, the one she thought she'd buried. It wasn't gone. It was waiting, just quieter now. That evening, Leah received a message from an unknown number. It read, "You can block me, but you can't forget me." No name, but she didn't need one. Her stomach tightened. She deleted the message immediately, but the words stayed in her mind. Daniel walked in asking if she wanted to watch a show, and she said yes too quickly. They sat together, but Leah didn't follow a single scene. Every sound of her phone vibrating made her flinch, afraid Daniel would notice. The fear wasn't of being caught anymore, it was of losing control completely. At work, Leah struggled to focus. A small mistake in a report led her manager to call her in. He asked if everything was okay, and she nodded with a forced smile. After the meeting, she sat at her desk, staring at her reflection in the black computer screen. Her face looked tired, her eyes empty. She thought about quitting, moving away, starting fresh, but the thought of leaving Emma behind made her hesitate. Deep down, she wasn't sure if she wanted to escape or be caught. Both outcomes felt like punishment. Later that week, Daniel surprised Leah with dinner reservations at her favorite restaurant. She dressed up, trying to match his energy. For a while it worked. They laughed about small things, shared dessert, and even held hands like they used to. But when a couple nearby mentioned their engagement, Leah froze. The word itself felt poisonous now. Daniel noticed her change in mood but didn't push. He told her he loved her before leaving the tip on the table. Leah said it back automatically, but it sounded like a line she'd practiced too many times. That night, Leah received another message from Mark, a photo of the old hotel sign. The caption said nothing, but the meaning was clear. She turned her phone face down and tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying memories. She imagined him waiting there, expecting her to show up. For hours, she fought the urge to drive out, but by midnight she gave in. She told herself it would be for closure. The road was empty, the lights blurry. She parked in the same spot as before, feeling like she was walking into her own confession. Mark was there, standing near the entrance, looking the same. Calm, confident, dangerous. They didn't touch, didn't speak much. He asked why she kept running from him. She said she wasn't running, she was trying to survive. He smirked, saying she'd never be able to forget him. Leah left first, heart heavy, realizing he was right. She didn't love him anymore, not in the way she thought. What she loved was the chaos, the part of herself that came alive when she was doing something wrong, and that terrified her most of all. The next morning, Leah promised herself that was the last time she'd see him. She deleted the new number, avoided social media, and tried focusing on the party again. But she couldn't stop wondering if Emma noticed anything strange. When Emma called that evening, Leah's chest tightened. She answered casually, pretending nothing was wrong. Emma said Mark was acting distant lately, and Leah nearly dropped her phone. She reassured her sister that men got nervous before big commitments. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning of something much worse. Days passed and Leah felt like she was being watched. Not by Mark, not by Daniel, but by her own guilt. Every time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She started drinking more coffee to stay distracted, staying up late to rearrange party plans. Daniel noticed the exhaustion and told her to rest, but she brushed him off. Her mind raced too much to sleep. One evening while driving home, she saw Mark's car parked outside her street. She didn't stop, but that night she dreamed of headlights following her everywhere. Before we go deeper into what happens next, where the secret starts tearing everything apart, take a second to support the channel. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you think. The week before the party, Emma visited Leah to pick up decorations. They laughed and reminisced about childhood, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by ribbons and candles. For a moment, Leah felt like nothing was wrong. But when Emma mentioned how lucky she was to have found Mark, Leah's smile froze. She excused herself to the kitchen, pretending to fetch tea. In the reflection of the microwave, she saw her own face, calm, polite, and completely detached. That moment she realized she'd become an expert at pretending. The next morning, Leah found a small box on her doorstep. Inside was a forgotten birthday cake, chocolate, her favorite, and a note that said, "For the one I never stopped celebrating." It wasn't signed, but she didn't need a name. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the counter. The sweetness in the air turned bitter. Daniel came home early, noticed the box, and asked who sent it. Leah lied, saying a coworker had dropped it off. He believed her easily, which somehow made her feel worse. Trust was now another lie to carry. That night, Leah opened the cake box again. The frosting had smudged from travel, but the note was still there, folded under the cardboard. She read it once more before tearing it apart. The smell of chocolate filled the room, thick and heavy. She tossed the box into the trash, then took it out again minutes later, afraid someone might see it. She stuffed it deep into a plastic bag, sealed it, and shoved it under the sink. It felt like burying evidence of a crime, one only she knew existed. Daniel suggested Leah take a few days off from work. She agreed, pretending to rest, but her mind kept spinning. She walked around the house aimlessly, unable to focus on anything. When she saw the sealed bag under the sink, she pulled it out and threw it into the outside bin. For a moment it felt freeing, like she'd finally let something go. But that night, when she opened the cupboard for dish soap, she smelled chocolate again. She checked everywhere, but there was nothing. It was her imagination, she told herself. It had to be. Emma texted Leah a picture of her engagement gown. It was beautiful. Lace, ivory, perfect. Leah stared at it too long, tracing the details with her finger on the screen. Then she noticed Mark's reflection faintly visible behind Emma in the mirror. That single detail broke her focus. She couldn't tell if he was smiling or not. The image burned in her mind all night. She deleted the photo but kept seeing it anyway. Every time she closed her eyes, that faint reflection returned, like a ghost she couldn't drive away. Leah stopped eating properly. Daniel noticed her pushing food around her plate and asked if something was wrong. She blamed work again. He kissed her forehead and told her he was proud of how hard she worked to keep family close. The kindness almost made her cry. That night, Leah stayed awake, sitting by the window with her phone in hand. She wanted to tell Mark to stop contacting her, but she also wanted him to send another message. The silence was harder to live with than the guilt itself. The sound of rain woke Leah the next morning. She sat by the kitchen table, listening to it hit the roof. It reminded her of the first night she and Mark crossed the line. Every memory felt sharper in the rain. The smell of his jacket, the sound of his laugh. She hated herself for missing him, yet she did. When Daniel came downstairs, he kissed her cheek and poured coffee. Leah smiled weakly. The rain continued outside, soft and steady, like the past tapping on the windows asking to be let in. Leah decided to distract herself by cleaning the house. While dusting the living room shelf, she found an old photo of her and Emma as kids. Their smiles looked pure, untouched by the things adults do to each other. She set it aside, feeling her throat tighten. When Daniel returned home, he noticed the photo on the table and smiled. "You were adorable," he said. Leah nodded but didn't tell him that looking at that photo felt like looking at a grave, one for everything she'd destroyed, but couldn't bring herself to bury. The week grew heavier as the engagement day approached. Emma texted constantly, asking for advice, sending updates, sharing her happiness. Leah responded with emojis and polite words, but each message was like a paper cut she couldn't ignore. She thought about confessing again, about burning it all down before the truth destroyed them anyway. But she couldn't do that to Emma. Or maybe she couldn't handle the shame that would follow. Either way, the silence continued, and Leah carried it like a stone she had learned to balance but never drop. The night before the engagement, Leah sat by the window again, watching the lights of passing cars. Daniel came behind her, wrapping his arms around her, saying he couldn't wait to dance with her at Emma's party. She smiled softly and leaned into him, pretending to feel safe. When he fell asleep, she stayed up, staring at the reflection of her own face in the glass. The sound of the distant bell reached her faintly again, steady and low. She realized it had rung during every moment she tried to forget. Morning arrived heavy and gray. Leah forced herself out of bed, trying to focus on small tasks, ironing Daniel's shirt, fixing breakfast, pretending to care about the weather. Her mind, though, was somewhere else entirely. She knew she'd see Mark at the engagement party, and that thought alone made her hands shake. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd ignore him completely. But she also rehearsed what she'd say if he pulled her aside. Each thought left her dizzy. Guilt had stopped being a feeling. It had become her daily routine. Leah arrived early at the venue to help decorate. The hall smelled of fresh flowers and champagne. Emma was radiant, laughing with the event planner. Watching her sister move across the room, Leah felt both proud and sick. She knew Emma had no idea the foundation of her happiness was cracked. Mark arrived a little later, looking calm, collected, untouched by all the chaos he'd helped create. When their eyes met, Leah looked away instantly, pretending to focus on the cake table. Her stomach churned as the day moved closer to its breaking point. Daniel showed up carrying a box of candles, cheerful as always. He kissed Leah's forehead and told her how proud he was of her for helping so much. She smiled faintly, unable to hold his gaze for long. When he walked away, Leah turned back to arranging decorations, her eyes drawn to the mirror across the hall. In the reflection, she caught a glimpse of Mark watching her from a distance. His expression was unreadable, but she could feel the pull, the old dangerous connection that refused to die no matter how hard she tried. Hours passed, guests started arriving, and the room filled with light and laughter. Leah moved through the crowd, greeting family friends and pretending everything was fine. She caught glimpses of Mark helping Emma greet people, his arm gently placed around her back. Every touch felt like a knife. Leah poured herself a drink. She didn't finish. Her mother called her over for photos, and she posed dutifully, smiling until her cheeks ached. Somewhere between the flashes and laughter, she realized she couldn't breathe in this world she'd built out of lies anymore. As speeches began, Leah stood near the edge of the room, clapping politely. Daniel was nearby, chatting with Emma's friends. When Mark took the microphone to toast his fiancé, Leah felt her throat close. His voice sounded warm, rehearsed, sincere, the kind of tone he used to use with her. The words about love and loyalty twisted inside her. She wanted to walk out, but she couldn't move. Everyone around her smiled and cheered, completely unaware that the man speaking about devotion had already broken every promise he'd ever made. After the toast, Mark approached Leah near the buffet table. His expression was calm, too calm. He asked if she was okay, his tone low but firm. Leah didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, hoping Daniel wouldn't see them. He said he needed to talk later, away from everyone. She told him there was nothing left to say, but her voice cracked halfway through. He smirked faintly, the same way he used to when he knew he'd already won. Leah walked away without looking back, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. Leah escaped to the restroom. Locking the door behind her, she splashed cold water on her face and stared into the mirror. Her reflection looked pale and exhausted. She whispered to herself that she'd end this tonight, one way or another. A knock on the door startled her, and she froze until the footsteps faded. She stayed there a few more minutes, steadying her breathing before stepping back into the hall. The noise of music and laughter hit her like a wave, but she forced herself to smile again, slipping back into her mask. Emma found Leah soon after and hugged her tightly, thanking her for everything. Leah smiled, saying it was nothing. Her sister looked so genuinely happy that Leah's eyes stung. For a brief moment, she wished she could go back to being the older sister who protected her instead of betraying her. Emma walked away to greet more guests, and Leah stood alone, her drink untouched. Across the room, Mark was watching her again. Their eyes met just for a second, but it felt like the entire night shifted with that one look. Leah couldn't take it anymore. She stepped outside for air, the cool evening breeze hitting her face. The parking lot was quiet, the lights dim. She stood under one of them, trying to calm her thoughts. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn, she already knew it was Mark. He stopped a few feet away and said her name softly. Leah told him not to follow her, that it was over. He said it wasn't that simple. Their shadows stretched across the pavement, overlapping in a way that made her sick. She walked away first. Inside, the music grew louder. Leah rejoined the party, her smile strained. Daniel offered her a drink, asking if she felt all right. She nodded, taking it from him. The liquid burned her throat, but she didn't care. Mark danced with Emma now, spinning her under the lights, both of them laughing. Leah couldn't look away. Around them everyone clapped and cheered, unaware of the quiet war playing out in the crowd. Leah stood perfectly still, her glass trembling in her hand, realizing how completely she'd lost control of everything she once tried to manage. She slipped out again, finding a small side door that led to the garden. The night was cooler there, and the sounds of laughter were muffled. Leah sat on a stone bench, gripping her purse like it might anchor her. She thought about running away, disappearing somewhere no one would ever find her. But she knew she wouldn't. The mess she'd made was too deep. The faint sound of the church bell carried across the wind again, steady and distant. It felt like a reminder, not of faith, but of the promises she'd already broken. A light rain began to fall, small drops speckling her dress. She didn't move. The cold felt grounding. From the window she could see silhouettes dancing. Emma and Mark among them. They looked like a picture from a life Leah wasn't allowed to have. A car door slammed somewhere nearby, and Leah turned instinctively, half expecting to see Mark again. But it was just a guest leaving early. She closed her eyes, wishing the night would end before she did something she couldn't take back. Somewhere deep down, she already knew it wouldn't. Leah went back inside to find Daniel, but he was busy talking to her mother. She joined them, forcing a smile, acting like the loving wife everyone believed she was. Her mother complimented the event and said how proud she was of both daughters. Leah's chest tightened. When Daniel mentioned taking photos later, she agreed, pretending excitement. Every lie was getting easier to tell. Every smile felt more automatic. Leah realized she had become exactly what she once despised, someone who wore truth like a costume. And it fit too well. Later, Leah walked past the dessert table and saw the cake she'd helped choose. It was tall, elegant, perfect. The same color as her wedding cake had been. The sight made her uneasy. Mark approached quietly, placing a hand on the back of her chair. He whispered something she couldn't quite hear over the music, but she knew it wasn't kind. She stood up sharply and walked away, ignoring the stares from nearby guests. Emma was across the room, laughing with friends, completely unaware that her engagement night was slowly turning into something else. Leah went outside again, but this time Mark followed her before she could stop him. He caught her by the arm, asking why she was acting like a stranger. She pulled away and told him she was done playing his games. He looked angry, saying she'd started this. Leah said she'd end it too. The rain had grown heavier now, soaking through her dress. Their words were sharp, low, dangerous. She walked toward her car without looking back, trembling but determined. Inside, she could still see his reflection in the rearview mirror, standing in the rain. Driving home felt endless. Leah gripped the wheel tightly, her thoughts tangled between rage and regret. She reached the empty road outside town and pulled over, her body shaking. For a while she just sat there, the sound of rain hitting the roof steady and cold. She thought about calling Daniel, telling him she'd gone home early. Instead, she turned off her phone completely. In the silence, she realized how far she'd fallen from the person she used to be, and how impossible it seemed to ever climb back. Leah didn't go home right away. She drove to an old overlook where she and Emma used to watch fireworks as kids. The city lights glowed below, blurred through rain and memory. She sat there until her mind went blank. For the first time in months, she didn't think about Mark or Daniel or Emma, just the version of herself that existed before all this. She wondered if that person was still somewhere inside, or if she'd been erased by her own choices. The thought lingered as she finally started the car again. When Leah arrived home, Daniel was asleep on the couch. The TV flickered softly, showing an old movie. She covered him with a blanket and stood there watching him breathe. He looked peaceful, trusting, undeserving of any of this. Leah felt a strange mix of love and pity. She touched his hair lightly before going upstairs. In the mirror, she saw herself again. mascara streaked, dress damp, eyes tired. For a moment she didn't recognize the woman staring back. It felt like meeting a stranger who knew all her secrets and hated her for them. The next morning, Leah pretended everything was fine. Daniel made breakfast, humming a song from the party, and Leah played along. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Emma thanking her for all the help. Leah replied with a heart emoji and closed it quickly. She was terrified to see another message from Mark, but it never came. The absence felt worse. It was as if he decided she was no longer worth the effort. That silence stung deeper than words. For the first time she wondered if losing him might actually save her. At work, Leah tried to focus again. She organized files, responded to emails, and forced small talk with coworkers. The normalcy felt strange, almost foreign. During lunch, she checked her reflection in her phone camera. Polished, calm, normal. No one would guess what she'd done. When she left the office, rain clouds were forming again. The sky looked heavy, mirroring her mood. Driving home, she passed the church with the old bell. The sound echoed faintly through her window, steady and familiar, reminding her that some things never stopped ringing, no matter how far you drove. That evening Emma called, asking if Leah could come by to help with post-party cleanup. Leah agreed, not wanting to raise suspicion. When she arrived, Emma was barefoot in the kitchen, humming happily as she boxed leftover food. Mark wasn't there. Leah felt relieved and disappointed at once. They talked casually for a while, just like before. It almost felt normal until Emma mentioned Mark had been quiet since the night of the party. Leah's pulse jumped, but she kept her expression calm. She said he was probably just tired, avoiding the truth in her tone. Emma asked Leah to stay for dinner, but she declined, claiming she needed rest. As Leah reached for her purse, Emma hugged her tightly and said she was lucky to have such a supportive sister. Leah froze for a second before returning the hug. Driving home, those words replayed in her head until they made her feel sick. Supportive sister. If Emma ever knew the truth, she'd never speak to her again. Leah gripped the steering wheel tightly, whispering that she'd fix everything somehow. But deep down, she didn't even know what fixing meant anymore. When Leah got home, Daniel had made tea for both of them. They sat in silence, the faint sound of rain tapping the windows. He asked if she was all right, saying she seemed distant lately. Leah smiled softly, saying she was just tired from the event. Daniel nodded and told her he was proud of how much she'd done for her family. The words stung. Leah thanked him quietly, forcing back tears. When he went to bed, she stayed in the kitchen, staring at the cup of tea until it went completely cold. That night, Leah dreamed of the party again. The music, the laughter, the dance. But in the dream, when Emma turned to face her fiancé, it wasn't Mark standing there. It was Daniel. Leah woke up gasping, confused and sweating. The dream left her shaken, the faces blending together like one endless betrayal. She couldn't tell who she was angry with anymore. Mark for lying, herself for allowing it, or Daniel for being too kind to notice. She sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, unable to close her eyes again. Leah decided she couldn't keep living between lies. She opened her phone, typing a message to Mark saying they needed to talk once and for all. Her thumb hovered before pressing send. She didn't know what she'd say, whether it would be an ending or a beginning, but she knew the silence had to break. The message sent successfully. She set the phone down and stared at the screen, waiting. Minutes passed with no reply. She told herself it didn't matter, but when it finally buzzed, the words on it made her blood run cold. The message said, "You'll regret ignoring me." No name, no context, but Leah knew who it was. Her stomach tightened as she read it again. She wanted to delete it, but she couldn't. The words felt like a trap waiting to close. She didn't reply, turning off her phone and pushing it under a pillow. For hours she lay there in the dark, unable to sleep. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with the sound of the bell ringing again. Loud, constant and impossible to escape, no matter how far she ran. Morning came with silence. Daniel had already left for work, leaving her a note on the counter about dinner plans. Leah ignored it. Her phone blinked with another message from Mark, this one saying they needed to talk in person. She typed back a short answer. Fine. One last time. Her hands shook when she hit send. She didn't know if she wanted closure or revenge, maybe both. She promised herself it would be the final conversation, though she'd made that promise before. This time it felt heavier, like something irreversible was coming. They agreed to meet that evening at the small hotel where it all began. Leah spent the day pacing the house, unable to focus on anything. She changed outfits 3 times, not because she wanted to impress him, but because she couldn't decide who she wanted to be, the guilty wife, the betrayed lover, or the woman trying to save herself. When the clock hit 6, she grabbed her keys and left without looking back. The rain had started again, steady and cold, soaking the streets like the world was trying to wash itself clean. Mark was already waiting in the hotel parking lot, leaning against his car. Leah parked a few spaces away and took a moment before stepping out. He looked different. Tired, anxious, less sure of himself. When she approached, he didn't smile. He just said they needed to fix this before everything collapsed. Leah asked what he meant, and that's when he told her. Emma had started asking questions. Someone had seen them together weeks ago, and now Emma suspected something. Leah's heart pounded as Mark said he'd told Emma it was all her fault. Leah stood frozen as the words sank in. He'd blamed her. He said it like it was practical, like a solution. Mark told her it was better if she took the fall quietly, that Emma would forgive her eventually. Leah felt something break inside her. All the lies, all the promises, it had all been to protect him. She realized she wasn't his love or his weakness. She was his shield. Her anger rose slowly, steady and cold. She turned to leave, but Mark caught her arm again. This time she didn't look back at him. Leah drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Every part of her wanted to scream, to expose him, to burn the truth in front of everyone. But part of her also wanted to disappear completely. When she pulled into the driveway, Daniel was waiting at the door, smiling, asking if she'd had a good day. Leah hugged him tightly. Too tightly. He seemed surprised, but he hugged her back. For the first time in weeks, Leah didn't feel guilt. She felt something colder, a sense of final clarity. That night, Leah couldn't sleep. She walked through the house in the dark, touching walls, windows, furniture, the ordinary things that now felt temporary. She opened the kitchen drawer and found the small knife Daniel used for fruit. She picked it up, turning it in her hand, not with intent but curiosity. The metal was cool and clean. She set it back down and sat by the table, staring at the faint light from the street lamp outside. In her mind she could still hear Mark's voice blaming her, calm and confident, like it was routine. Leah spent the next morning pretending nothing had happened. She cleaned the house, did laundry, and made breakfast for Daniel before he left for work. But the calm didn't last. Emma called, saying she needed to talk about something important. Her voice sounded different. Not angry, just tired. Leah agreed to meet her that afternoon at their mother's house. When she hung up, her chest felt heavy. She wondered if Emma already knew everything. She thought about lying again, but didn't know if she had the energy for it anymore. At her mother's house, Emma was waiting on the porch. Leah approached slowly, bracing herself. Emma looked nervous but smiled faintly. Inside, their mother was baking, the smell of sugar filling the room. The small talk felt unbearable. When their mother went to another room, Emma turned serious. She said she'd noticed changes in Mark, that something was wrong. Leah tried to sound surprised, but her voice cracked slightly. Emma asked if Leah had seen him recently. Leah said no. The lie slipped out so easily it scared her. Emma nodded, unconvinced but silent. Driving home afterward, Leah felt sick. She had lied again, even when she didn't want to. The truth sat on her tongue, heavy and poisonous. She thought about calling Emma back, confessing everything, ending the cycle once and for all. But when she looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, she didn't recognize herself anymore. This version of Leah wasn't someone who confessed. She was someone who survived. And surviving, she realized, often meant letting someone else bleed first. The thought scared her, but she couldn't deny how right it felt. That evening Leah's phone buzzed again. It was another message from Mark. "We need to talk again tonight." She ignored it at first, but then another followed. "Emma's going to find out." Leah stared at the words for a long time before replying. Then maybe she should. There was no response after that. She turned the phone face down and walked to the window. Outside, the rain was heavier now, flooding the street. She could hear the faint echo of thunder, distant but constant, like the world holding its breath before something broke. Daniel came home late, drenched from the rain, and Leah helped him dry off. He told her the power might go out if the storm kept up. She nodded, barely listening. As they ate dinner, lightning flashed outside and the lights flickered. Leah found herself staring at the candle on the table, watching the flame dance each time the thunder rolled. Daniel noticed her blank expression and reached for her hand. She smiled weakly, squeezing his fingers once before pulling away. He went to the living room to watch the news, leaving her alone with her thoughts. When the lights finally went out, Leah didn't move. The house fell into darkness, broken only by the candlelight. She felt strangely calm, as if the world had stopped demanding she pretend. She walked to the window, staring at the storm outside. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of the church bell reached her again, carried by the wind. She whispered that she understood now. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was supposed to save, not destroy. But hers had done both, and she couldn't tell anymore which part she wanted to keep. Later that night, a car pulled into the driveway. Leah peeked through the curtains and saw Mark stepping out, soaked from the rain. Panic mixed with anger as she realized he'd come to the house. She went to the door before Daniel could, opening it just enough to block the view. Mark said he needed to talk privately. Leah told him to leave, but he pushed the door slightly, insisting it couldn't wait. She stepped outside, shutting the door behind her. The rain soaked her instantly. They stood face to face, words sharp, their voices almost drowned by thunder. Mark said Emma was growing suspicious and that Leah had to help him fix it. She asked how, and he said she needed to lie again, say Emma was imagining things, that Mark had been faithful all along. Leah couldn't believe his calm tone. He still thought he could control everything. When she said she was done covering for him, he laughed bitterly. He called her selfish, saying she'd ruin everyone just to feel innocent. The words hit harder than she expected. For the first time, Leah realized he wasn't scared. He was angry. Leah told him she was done protecting him and turned to go inside. He grabbed her arm roughly, trying to stop her. She told him to let go, but he didn't. The struggle was brief but real. Two people fighting not over love but over who still had control. Leah pushed him back harder than she meant to. He slipped on the wet steps and fell backward, hitting his head against the edge of the porch. The sound was sharp and final. Leah froze. Rain poured harder, washing across the porch like nothing had happened. Leah stood there for a long moment, unable to move. The rain blurred her vision, the world spinning in slow motion. Mark didn't get up. She crouched down beside him, shaking his shoulder lightly. No response. His eyes were open, unfocused. Panic clawed at her chest, but her body wouldn't react. When she finally stood, she looked at the door. Daniel was still inside, unaware. The storm covered everything, even the sound of her heartbeat. She took a step back, her mind empty except for one thought. She couldn't let anyone know. Leah dragged Mark's body toward his car, the rain masking every sound. Her hands slipped, her muscles trembling, but she kept going. When she finally got him inside, she sat in the driver's seat, staring at the steering wheel. She thought about calling the police, about confessing, but she couldn't. The story would never make sense. It would destroy Emma, destroy Daniel, destroy her. She wiped the rain from her face, though she couldn't tell if it was rain or tears anymore. Then she turned the key and let the car roll slowly toward the road. She parked the car near the overlook, the same spot she'd sat in just nights ago, and left it there. The rain made it look natural, like someone had simply stopped to rest. Leah stood for a moment, staring at the headlights dimming through the storm. She whispered something she couldn't even hear herself, maybe a prayer, maybe an apology. Then she walked back home, her shoes heavy with water, her body numb. Every step felt like sinking. When she reached the porch, she paused before opening the door, wiping her face clean. Daniel was asleep on the couch again, the TV still on. Leah sat beside him quietly, watching the faint flicker of light dance across his face. He looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos outside. She thought about waking him, about saying everything that had just happened, but the words wouldn't come. She leaned back instead, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the storm to end. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled one last time. Leah whispered to herself that everything was over now, even though she knew nothing had really ended. It had only changed shape. The next morning, Leah woke up to the sound of birds, instead of rain. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, making the world look innocent again. For a brief second, she believed it had all been a nightmare. Then she noticed her muddy shoes by the door and the faint bruise on her wrist. Reality returned, cold and clear. Daniel was making coffee, humming softly. He greeted her with a smile, completely unaware. Leah sat at the table, nodding, pretending to listen. Her mind replayed every detail of the night before, every sound, every heartbeat. Emma called that afternoon, her voice shaking. She said Mark hadn't come home. Leah felt her throat tighten but kept her tone calm. She suggested maybe he'd stayed with a friend, or had car trouble. Emma sounded worried, saying it wasn't like him to disappear. Leah comforted her, promising she'd help look. After hanging up, Leah sat motionless for several minutes. She could still hear Emma's voice echoing in her mind. The guilt didn't come as panic this time. It came as a quiet acceptance that she was now part of a story that couldn't be undone. Police began searching the area by evening. Daniel turned on the news and Leah's stomach dropped when she saw the headline about a missing man and an abandoned car found by the cliff. The reporter mentioned heavy rain and poor visibility. Leah excused herself to the kitchen, gripping the counter to stay upright. She told herself it was an accident. That's what it was, an accident. She didn't mean to hurt him, but the more she repeated it, the less it sounded true. Somewhere deep inside, she knew she'd chosen not to stop him. When the officers came by the next day to ask questions, Leah stayed composed. They said Mark's car had been found, but there was no sign of him. Emma sat on the couch crying, while Daniel offered them coffee. Leah spoke carefully, saying she'd seen Mark at the party but not since. The officers nodded, taking notes. No one looked at her twice. When they left, Emma clung to Leah, sobbing into her shoulder. Leah held her tightly, whispering that everything would be okay, even though both of them knew that wasn't true. Days passed, and the investigation continued. Emma barely slept, calling Leah constantly for updates. Leah pretended to share her worry, offering comfort when she could. Daniel remained supportive, never questioning her strange quietness. Each night, Leah lay awake, listening to the distant bell again. It didn't sound haunting anymore. It sounded like judgment. Every time it rang, she imagined Mark still out there somewhere, waiting for her. She told herself he was gone, that it was finished. But deep down, she knew stories like theirs never ended. They only waited for the next knock at the door. Leah started to lose track of time. Mornings and nights felt the same. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock that now seemed louder than ever. Daniel worked long hours, and Emma called constantly, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Leah played her role perfectly. The caring sister, the patient listener, the calm voice. But inside she was falling apart. She couldn't stop seeing the rain, the porch, the moment everything ended. She told herself it was self-defense, though no one had accused her yet. The guilt didn't need witnesses to exist. One evening, Leah went to the porch where it happened. The wood still carried faint stains from the rain that night, though she couldn't tell what was water and what wasn't. She stood there for a long time, listening to the wind. The neighborhood looked peaceful, unaware that a ghost now lingered in her mind. She thought about confessing, about letting the truth burn through her life just to feel clean again. But when she pictured Emma's face, the thought died instantly. Some truths, she decided, were too cruel to ever be shared. The police called Emma again, saying they found Mark's phone near the cliff edge. Leah sat beside her sister as she cried, playing the role she knew too well. She held Emma's hand and said it might not mean anything. Maybe he dropped it. The words sounded empty, even to her. Emma asked why men always leave without saying goodbye. Leah didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, trying not to picture the headlights fading into the rain. Every kind word she spoke felt like another lie she'd have to live with forever. Daniel started noticing Leah's distance again. One morning, he asked if she wanted to see someone, maybe a counselor. She said she was just tired, that the family stress was catching up. He nodded but didn't look convinced. Leah smiled weakly and kissed his cheek before leaving for work. On the drive, she realized she didn't even know where she was going. She parked near the overlook again and sat there for hours watching the sky shift colors. The water below shimmered faintly. Somewhere in that quiet, she whispered that she hoped he found peace. The investigation stretched into weeks. Search teams combed the area with dogs and divers. Nothing surfaced. The police began leaning toward an accident caused by the storm. Leah listened to their theories through Emma, nodding at the right moments, pretending to share the confusion. Every night she dreamed of headlights disappearing into fog. Sometimes she woke up gasping, expecting to hear sirens outside. Daniel would hold her close, unaware that the woman he was comforting was the reason someone had vanished. Leah didn't cry anymore. Her tears had turned into a kind of quiet numbness. One afternoon, Leah's mother invited both sisters for lunch. Emma arrived pale and thinner, exhaustion clear on her face. Leah cooked and served, trying to fill the silence with normal conversation. Their mother asked them to stop worrying so much, saying everything would make sense soon. Emma nodded, though her eyes were empty. Leah wanted to reach across the table and tell her everything. The truth, the guilt, the reason she couldn't sleep. But when Emma smiled faintly, Leah stayed silent again. It was easier to live with guilt than to watch her sister break. That evening, Leah found Daniel in the living room sorting through old photos. He showed her a picture from their wedding day and said he missed how happy they were. She smiled, saying she did too. He didn't notice how her hands trembled slightly. When he went to bed, Leah stayed behind, staring at the photo in his hand. Her dress, her smile, the promise behind it. All of it felt like a memory that belonged to someone else. She wondered if Daniel would still hold her if he ever learned who she truly was. Emma began attending church again, saying it helped her feel close to Mark. She invited Leah to come with her one Sunday, and Leah agreed. Inside, the smell of candles and wood polish filled the air. The priest spoke about forgiveness, about how the truth always finds light. Leah sat motionless, her mind echoing those words. She looked at her sister kneeling in prayer, her eyes closed, her lips trembling. Leah wanted to believe forgiveness was real, but she couldn't imagine a version of herself that ever deserved it. She left before the service ended. That night, Leah opened the drawer beside her bed and pulled out the note she'd hidden weeks ago, the one from the cake box. You'll always be mine. The handwriting looked different now, weaker somehow. She tore it in half, then in half again, dropping the pieces into a glass of water. The ink bled instantly, turning the water gray. She watched until the paper dissolved completely, then poured it down the sink. It didn't feel freeing like she expected. It just felt quiet, like something final had disappeared, leaving only space behind. Leah started working longer hours, anything to avoid being home. Daniel appreciated her dedication, thinking it helped her cope. But in truth, Leah was avoiding herself. She stayed in the office long after everyone left, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the window, a faint outline, tired and hollow. One night, she saw headlights reflecting behind her in the glass, and her chest seized before she realized it was just traffic outside. Still, she couldn't shake the thought that something or someone was still following her. Emma visited Leah's house unexpectedly one evening. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was calm. She said the police were closing the case. They'd ruled Mark's disappearance as an accident. Leah nodded, asking if she was okay. Emma said she wasn't, but she'd learned to be. They sat together quietly, drinking tea, the silence between them almost comforting. Leah thought about telling her the truth again, but couldn't. The words would only destroy the fragile peace they'd both built. Some pain, she realized, was easier to carry than to share. After Emma left, Leah went upstairs and opened her closet. She pulled out the dress she'd worn the night it happened. It was still damp in her memory, even though she'd washed it days ago. She folded it neatly and placed it in a box, sealing the lid with tape. Then she carried it to the attic and pushed it behind old decorations. It felt like burying evidence, but also like closing a chapter. When she climbed back down, the air felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, she believed maybe she could still start over. But that peace didn't last. A week later, Leah received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end said they were with the investigation team and had found something new. A wallet near the water's edge, one that matched Mark's ID. Leah's heart stopped for a second. She asked if they found anything else. The officer said no, just that, and thanked her for confirming details. After the call, Leah sat on the floor staring at her hands. Her body felt weightless, her mind replaying that night on an endless loop. The next day, Daniel noticed Leah zoning out during breakfast. He asked what was wrong, and she told him about the wallet. He said maybe it meant closure, that Emma could finally heal. Leah nodded, but inside she felt the opposite. Closure meant endings, and endings invited questions. If they found the car and the wallet, it was only a matter of time before something else surfaced. She told herself the truth would stay buried. The storm had seen to that. But she couldn't stop glancing at the window, half expecting someone to appear there. Emma called later, her voice calmer this time. She said she was ready to accept that Mark was gone. Leah listened, her heart aching. Emma said she didn't hate him, even if he'd been hiding something. That made Leah freeze. Emma didn't explain what she meant, but Leah knew. Her sister had seen through pieces of the truth, even without knowing the whole thing. When the call ended, Leah stood in silence. Her body felt heavy, her breath shallow. Maybe Emma didn't need to know everything. Maybe she already knew enough. Days turned into a strange routine again. Leah went to work, cooked dinner, laughed at Daniel's jokes. On the outside she looked healed, but at night she woke up drenched in sweat, convinced she heard footsteps on the porch. She would go downstairs, open the door, and find nothing but wind and the faint sound of the bell from the church down the street. It became her constant reminder, not of guilt anymore, but of survival. The world had moved on, but she couldn't. She wasn't sure she wanted to. The silence had become her home. One morning, Daniel left early for a business trip, leaving Leah alone for the weekend. The house felt enormous, filled with echoes. She walked through every room, touching the walls like she was trying to prove it was real. When she reached the porch, she stood at the spot where it happened and whispered his name once. The sound vanished into the wind. She thought she saw a shape by the driveway. A trick of light maybe, but it disappeared as fast as it came. She shut the door and leaned against it, trembling slightly. That night she dreamed again of rain. But this time it wasn't the storm that frightened her. It was the calm afterward. In the dream she stood on the porch as the bell rang in the distance, over and over, louder each time. When she looked down, the floorboards beneath her were wet again, and footprints appeared leading away from the house. She followed them until they vanished near the edge of the road. When she woke, the sound still lingered faintly in her ears, like the dream hadn't finished when her eyes opened. Leah tried to distract herself by baking. The smell of sugar filled the kitchen, almost masking the unease that had settled in her chest. She placed a jar of imported honey on the counter, the same one she'd once hidden from Daniel. It had been a gift from Mark long ago, back when everything still felt exciting. She stared at it for a long time before finally throwing it in the trash. The jar shattered against the bottom of the bin, sticky and final. For a second Leah felt lighter, but the feeling didn't last. Emma visited the next morning, bringing flowers. She said she wanted to start fresh, maybe even travel for a while. Leah encouraged her, saying it was a good idea. They sat in the garden, drinking tea quietly. Emma asked Leah if she believed people could truly change. Leah said she thought people could hide who they were for a long time, but change, real change, was harder. Emma didn't respond. She just stared at her sister, eyes full of something Leah couldn't read. Before leaving, she hugged Leah and said she'd always love her. After Emma left, Leah sat in the garden for a while, unable to move. The flowers Emma brought were beautiful. Lilies, bright and full of life. Leah thought about planting them, but didn't. She just stared at them, wondering if Emma's words carried a deeper meaning. Maybe Emma knew more than she admitted. Maybe forgiveness had already begun quietly, without words. The idea both comforted and terrified. Leah, forgiveness meant acceptance. And acceptance meant admitting there was something to forgive. She wasn't sure she could handle that truth from her sister's lips. That night, Leah stood by the window watching rain fall again. The rhythm was almost calming now. Familiar. She thought about everything that had happened. The love, the lies, the accident. None of it felt real anymore. More like a story she'd read about someone else. She whispered to herself that she'd survived. But the words sounded strange. Survival wasn't the same as living. She turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the faint echo of the bell again. This time, it didn't sound accusing. It sounded like goodbye. Weeks later, Emma moved to another town. Leah helped her pack boxes, smiling through the farewell. When they hugged goodbye, Emma said she hoped Leah would visit soon. Leah nodded, promising she would. After the car drove away, Leah stood on the sidewalk until the sound of the engine disappeared completely. She felt both emptiness and relief. The distance between them would make pretending easier. Yet, as she turned to go inside, she caught her reflection in the window. Calm, composed, but not free. Some cages, she realized, don't need locks. They live inside you. Daniel returned home from his trip. A few days later, cheerful and relaxed. He hugged Leah tightly, saying he missed her. She smiled genuinely for the first time in a while. They had dinner together, laughing about small things, the kind of life Leah had always wanted. But even as she laughed, a part of her stayed detached, watching from a distance. Happiness felt like something she was borrowing, not owning. When Daniel went upstairs, Leah stayed behind, cleaning the table slowly. The faint sound of the bell outside rang again, softer this time, almost gentle. Later that night, Leah opened the window to let the cool air in. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and still. She looked toward the horizon where the bell tower stood faintly lit. It felt like the world had forgiven her. Even if she hadn't forgiven herself, she whispered that she was sorry. Not just for what she'd done, but for what she'd become. The wind carried her words away. She closed the window, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the dark, letting the silence settle like a fragile kind of peace. The next morning, Leah woke before sunrise. The world outside was quiet, washed clean after the night's rain. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of everything she'd buried pressing against her chest. Daniel stirred beside her, half awake, mumbling her name. She brushed his hair gently, whispering that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. It never had been. For the first time, Leah didn't try to convince herself otherwise. She realized peace wasn't coming. It had to be built, piece by piece, out of the ruins she'd created. Leah decided to visit the church. It was almost empty when she arrived, just a few candles flickering near the altar. The faint scent of wax and old wood filled the air. She sat in the back pew, folding her hands without knowing what to say. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't think she deserved it. Instead, she whispered that she wanted to stop feeling trapped. The bell above the church rang softly, the same one that had followed her through every secret and lie. This time, it didn't sound cruel. It sounded patient. On her way out, she stopped at the donation box and placed her wedding ring inside. It wasn't a rejection of Daniel. It was an act of release. The ring had started as a promise, then turned into a reminder of everything she wasn't. Watching it disappear into the slot, she felt something shift. She walked outside into the sunlight, squinting as the warmth touched her face. The guilt didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip. For the first time in months, she could breathe without flinching. The road ahead wasn't clean, but it was open. That afternoon, Daniel noticed the missing ring. He asked where it was, half joking, but Leah just smiled and said she'd put it away for safekeeping. He accepted the answer, though he studied her face a bit longer than usual. They spent the evening watching a movie, their hands brushing now and then. It wasn't romance, it was something quieter, like two people trying to rebuild something fragile. Leah didn't know if she still loved him in the same way, but she knew she wanted to be someone capable of love again. That was enough. Emma called a week later from her new city. She said she'd found a small apartment near the beach and that the air there felt lighter. Leah listened to her describe the sound of waves through her window. When Emma paused, she said she missed her. Leah told her she missed her too. The call ended warmly, but Leah sat there afterward, phone still in her hand, staring out at the fading sky. The distance between them felt both painful and merciful, a boundary that might finally keep the truth from spreading any further. The investigation officially closed that month. Police confirmed Mark's death as an accident caused by the storm and poor visibility. No foul play, no further questions. The announcement should have brought relief, but Leah only felt hollow. She walked out to the garden that evening, standing barefoot in the damp grass. The air smelled of wet soil and lilies. For the first time she allowed herself to cry. Not for Mark or Emma, but for the version of herself that never got a chance to exist without secrets. The tears felt clean, not shameful. After that night, Leah began writing again. Something she hadn't done since before the wedding. Small journal entries at first, quiet reflections no one else would read. She wrote about the sound of rain, about guilt, about the way silence could both comfort and destroy. The words came slowly, but each page felt like a confession that didn't need witnesses. She realized she didn't need to erase her past. She just had to understand it. Every sentence made her feel a little more human, a little less like a ghost haunting her own life. Daniel noticed the change in her. He said she seemed calmer, more present. Leah thanked him, though she didn't explain why. The truth wasn't something she could share, not even now. They started cooking together again. Small meals in the evenings. Sometimes he would catch her smiling to herself and ask what she was thinking. She'd say nothing, but inside she was thinking about how peace doesn't always come with justice. Sometimes it just arrives quietly when the fighting stops. And she was finally ready to stop fighting herself. One morning, Leah visited her mother with groceries. The visit was simple, pleasant. Her mother mentioned Emma's new photos online, smiling at the beach, sunlight on her face. Leah smiled too, proud and envious all at once. Before leaving, her mother handed her an old family photo. It was the two sisters as children, covered in sand from a long ago summer. Leah stared at it, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The innocence in that picture was gone forever. But the love behind it wasn't. It had just changed shape. At home, Leah placed the photo on her bedside table. The room felt brighter, quieter. She noticed the jar of honey she'd thrown away was missing from the bin. Daniel must have taken it out, thinking she'd discarded it by mistake. It sat clean on the counter, golden and harmless again. Leah opened it slowly and dipped a spoon inside. The taste was familiar, but it no longer carried the same weight. She smiled faintly, realizing the past didn't vanish. It just lost its power once you stopped feeding it. She finally stopped feeding it. Weeks passed and life began to move gently forward. Leah and Daniel hosted dinner for friends, laughing more naturally than before. Every now and then the topic of Emma came up, and Leah would tell stories that didn't hurt anymore. When she went to bed at night, she no longer heard the bell as often. And when she did, it didn't fill her with fear. It felt like a heartbeat in the distance, steady and forgiving. Time hadn't erased what she'd done, but it had given her the strength to live with it. One evening, Leah took a walk near the church. The air was cool, the sun dipping low. She paused outside the gates, looking at the bell tower glowing faintly in the fading light. For months, that sound had haunted her. Now she found herself hoping it would ring again, just once. A few seconds later, it did. The echo rolled across the street, soft and clear. Leah smiled faintly. It no longer felt like judgment. It felt like acknowledgement, as if the world had accepted her silence for what it was, not denial, but survival. When Leah returned home, Daniel was on the couch reading. He looked up and smiled, asking how her walk was. She said peaceful, and he nodded. Content. The house smelled faintly of coffee and candle wax. She sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. The warmth between them wasn't passion. It was forgiveness. She closed her eyes, realizing she didn't need to love perfectly to live honestly again. Sometimes surviving your own mistakes was its own kind of redemption. The truth hadn't saved her, but the choice to stay had. Months later, Leah visited Emma's new city. The ocean stretched wide and blue, the air smelling of salt and new beginnings. Emma greeted her with a smile that looked lighter, freer. They spent the day walking along the shore collecting shells like they used to as children. When the sun began to set, Emma said she forgave Mark for everything he'd ever done, even if she never got answers. Leah nodded quietly, eyes on the horizon. She whispered that forgiveness wasn't for the dead. It was for the living. Emma smiled and agreed. That night, Leah stayed in a small guest room at Emma's place. The sound of waves outside lulled her to sleep. In her dreams, she saw the porch again. But this time, it wasn't raining. The wood was dry, the air still. Mark was there, standing far away, not angry, just distant. He turned once, nodded, and walked into the fog until he was gone. Leah woke up with tears on her face, but they didn't hurt. They felt like closure, soft, quiet, overdue. She whispered a thank you to the empty room and went back to sleep. In the morning, Leah watched Emma making coffee in the kitchen. The sunlight caught her hair, and for the first time, Leah didn't see her as someone she'd wronged. She saw her as someone she still had. They talked about small things, laughing easily. The heaviness between them had vanished, replaced by something fragile but real. Leah helped her pack a few boxes, smiling when Emma joked about her terrible labeling system. It felt normal. Not the old normal. Something new, something earned. The kind of peace that didn't need perfection to exist. When Leah drove back home, the road felt lighter. The stormy stretch that used to frighten her was calm now, lined with trees shimmering in the wind. The old overlook appeared in the distance, the guardrail repaired, the grass growing fresh around it. She pulled over briefly, stepping out to look at the view. The air smelled like rain, though the sky was clear. She stood there for a long time, whispering goodbye one last time. This time it wasn't a plea, it was gratitude. She turned back toward the car, ready to keep going. Back home, Leah found Daniel working in the garden. He looked up, smiling when he saw her. She joined him, kneeling beside him to plant new flowers. The soil was cool and soft under her hands. For a moment she thought of the lilies Emma had given her months ago, now blooming nearby. She smiled, realizing life had kept growing even through the worst storms. When Daniel handed her another seedling, she took it carefully, pressing it into the earth. This was what rebuilding looked like. Small, slow, but real. She didn't need more than that. Later that evening, Leah sat by the window with her journal. She wrote about forgiveness, about how it wasn't a single act but a series of choices. Each word felt lighter, easier. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked outside. The sunset painted the sky in warm colors, soft and gold. Somewhere in the distance, the bell rang once more. She smiled, whispering that it could keep ringing if it wanted. She wasn't afraid of it anymore. The sound faded slowly, leaving behind only quiet, and in that quiet, she finally felt free. That night, Leah prepared dinner while Daniel set the table. The smell of food filled the house, the kind that felt like comfort rather than celebration. They ate together, talking about simple things, groceries, bills, maybe taking a trip next month. Leah realized how beautiful ordinary life could be once you stopped running from it. When Daniel thanked her for dinner, she smiled genuinely, saying it felt good to share a meal again. In that moment, she knew her life hadn't ended with guilt. It had just changed direction. That was its own kind of grace. After dinner, Leah stepped outside with her cup of tea. The garden glowed softly under the porch light. The air smelled like damp earth and new beginnings. She thought about how much had changed, not dramatically, but quietly. Her mistakes hadn't disappeared, yet they didn't own her anymore. She sipped the tea slowly, letting the warmth settle. She realized she'd spent so long fearing judgment that she forgot peace could exist without it. The night around her was still and kind. For once, she didn't feel the need to look over her shoulder. The next morning, Leah received a small postcard in the mail. It was from Emma. A picture of the ocean with the words, "It's never too late to forgive." Leah smiled softly, tracing the handwriting with her thumb. She placed the postcard beside the family photo on her nightstand. For years she'd kept reminders of guilt hidden. Now she was learning to keep reminders of love instead. She looked out the window at the bright morning sky, whispering that forgiveness wasn't about the past. It was about finding the courage to live with what remained. Months later, Leah visited the church again. The ring she'd left was gone, probably given to charity or melted into something new. She smiled at that thought. Maybe something broken could still be useful in another form. She lit a candle, watching the small flame flicker and settle. It didn't feel like confession. It felt like acknowledgement. She whispered a simple thank you before leaving. Outside, children were playing near the steps, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. Leah stood for a moment, realizing life had continued all around her, and somehow she'd caught up. When she returned home, the sky was pale blue and endless. Daniel was trimming the hedges, waving when he saw her. Leah waved back, smiling fully. The weight she'd carried for so long had become part of her story, not her prison. She wasn't the woman she used to be, and she wasn't the same one who'd made all those terrible choices either. She was something in between, flawed, honest, alive. She walked inside, opened her journal again, and wrote one final line: "Peace doesn't erase the past. It teaches you how to live with it." That evening, Leah sat on the porch where it had all begun. The wood was dry, the air warm, the world still. She watched the sky fade into twilight, her cup of tea resting beside her. Somewhere far away, the church bell rang one last time. It didn't feel like a reminder or a warning anymore. It felt like closure. Leah closed her eyes and smiled. She wasn't the same woman who'd kept secrets and lived in fear. She was someone new now, built from the ashes of everything she'd once destroyed, quietly choosing peace over punishment.